One take you will inevitably encounter when you read online discussions about video games is that gaming isn't political. This is pretty obviously incorrect. Video games, like any commodity sold in our economy, are affected by and have an impact on politics. They are connected to concerns of gambling regulations, corporate consolidation, and workplace harassment, just to name a few issues. And big AAA games publishers are just as political as any other corporation in existence. This, however, isn't usually what people are talking about when they discuss the politics of games. What they usually mean is that game X isn't or shouldn't be political, and therefore people should stop talking about it in political terms. This is also wrong, but less obviously so, and in this video I want to take some time to explain why. Any statement that has a political context or can reasonably be given one is also a political statement. To give you an example, income tax should be lowered by 5% is obviously a political statement, but so is better results are being achieved by people competing against each other rather than cooperating, or even something as simple as freedom is important. Therefore, any game that contains such messaging is also saying something about politics. It's important to state that impact doesn't matter for this to be true. A message doesn't become less political just because there are no measurable real-world changes based on the message itself. In the same way, media with political messaging doesn't magically become less political because it doesn't change people's attitudes or behaviors. I find it easiest to conceptualize the ways games can be political by dividing them into 3 layers, each one being increasingly more abstract. The layers are visualized by this onion, which I will refer back to throughout the video. The first layer is about surface-level political messaging. This includes games that have overtly political plots like those that involve governments, the police, military, warfare, espionage, and so on. Games like Call of Duty, Metal Gear, and BioShock fall into this category. Those games have a ton of surface-level, direct and specific political messages. An example of that would be showing 2 countries at war while presenting one of them as good and the other one as evil. The second layer is about themes. As stated before, any statement with a political context is a political statement. This includes general values and ideas about how things should be. Therefore, any story that expresses such ideas is political. Think conflicts in superhero stories or RPGs. The all-powerful villain who effortlessly destroys everyone who tries to stop him, who is nonetheless defeated by a group of heroes through the power of friendship, loyalty, and honesty. Meanwhile, the group of baddies is tearing itself apart because of their selfishness, arrogance, and unwillingness to learn. You have probably experienced a story like this dozens of times before. These stories are political even when they don't involve any overt political entities. They just need a conflict of ideas, with some of them winning over others and thereby being promoted. This doesn't have to be that straightforward though. Just because someone is winning doesn't mean the story is presenting them or their ideas as good. For instance, it could be about bad ideas winning because the heroes are lacking certain values. A complete analysis would obviously also include things like framing as well as take the whole work into consideration, not just the ending. Regardless of the story's complexity though, the result would always be political. The third layer is a bit more complicated. It's about base assumptions and core values rather than anything that happens in a story. What does the type of game you're creating say by its very existence? What kind of cultural context is responsible for such a creation? Such an analysis isn't just looking at plot, but also at game mechanics, progression systems, and reward structures. Folding Ideas has made a great video discussing the implications of exploration games like Minecraft and Satisfactory. In it, he talks about how their game design can reflect and perpetuate colonialist ideas about exploring and dominating nature as well as those inhabiting it. This does not mean the developers actively sought out to make games with such messaging though. It just means that they grew up in a society built on certain ideas, and that those can be found in these games. Another good example for Layer 3 is Death Stranding. Aside from the fact that the game has both overt and thematic political messaging of unity, mutual understanding, and cooperation, it also reinforces these ideas through gameplay. The online systems actively reward players for helping out others. Instead of giving players the opportunity to destroy others' creations, like in so many other online games, it is figuratively and literally making players build bridges. So, even if the game had no story at all, because of these systems, it would still be political. Now, I can already hear some of you ask, what about Pong, Pac-Man, or Space Invaders? These games are so basic, surely they're not political, right? They still have underlying base assumptions like competition is desirable or foreign species in space can first and foremost be conceptualized as threats. Think of what kind of world these games are creating. How do they function? What kind of rules are they built on? What do they see as normal, and what do they portray as weird or other? That doesn't mean the degree to which a game is political is always equal, just that politics cannot be completely removed from a game, even if what remains is very little. Art does not have to be profound to be political. So while a political analysis of just Space Invaders would be pretty ridiculous, using it as one example of a larger trend in games about space would not. The remaining question might be, why talk about it? Why care so much about what politics games have? And the answer to that is pretty simple. Because it's interesting. While consumer-oriented criticism about things like aesthetics and mechanical enjoyment certainly has its place, it is by far not the only lens through which we can discuss and criticize media. Using other lenses such as representation and depiction of diverse characters or base assumptions underlying game mechanics can be incredibly insightful and interesting. Issues like accessibility are even relevant in consumer and political contexts. Also, political analysis of popular media can give valuable insight into a lot of people's minds, since popular media by definition resonates with a large group of people. This type of analysis is often mischaracterized as inserting politics into media or trying to blame media for societal problems, but the truth is the opposite. By analyzing media through political lenses, we can learn something about society. If a lot of popular media contains similar political messaging, that could be a good hint as to what kind of societal attitudes exist that people might not even be aware of. The third layer is especially interesting here because not every design decision from a developer is necessarily intentional. They may have been acting on attitudes that they have been conditioned to accept uncritically their whole lives. Meaning that such analysis can also help artists become more aware of what they're creating and make something that is closer to their own sets of values, which is pretty much exactly what it does.
And, at first you take some criticism and you're like, wait a minute. And then you go look and it's like, wow, every woman in Dishonored 1 is either a servant, a prostitute, a witch, a queen, or a little girl. I think
or
maybe
dead,
or
killed,
or killed.
Yeah, right.
Or a mistress. We have a mistress also.
Sure.
But anyway, so that was not an intentional choice. And so when something like that pops up, you can get defensive if you want, or you can say, guys, let me just ask this: did we mean that? And the answer is no, we did not mean that. Would the game be worse if we took an action on this, or would the game be better? The game would be richer and more interesting.
Now, some people will still object to this because they feel this process politicizes gaming, and games, they say, are supposed to be an escape from politics. But I think it should be clear now that the politics were there all along. Most of the time when people complain about politics in games, they actually love politics. They just dislike that a critic or a game has politics they personally disagree with. Thanks for watching. I assume if you're still listening that you haven't already disliked the video and posted an angry comment, so why not tell me what you think of the video? To balance things out. Anyway, subscribe, join my Discord, keep the conversation going. See you next time.